Behold how good and pleasant it is when brethren and sisters can gather together in unity. Good afternoon, everyone. Greetings, colleagues and friends. I'm Reverend Brian E. Smith, and I am a part of the Strategic Initiatives team at the Chicago Theological Seminary. And I'd like to call the names of all the members of our team, including Lisa Zook, Brendan Diamond, Marie Whitney, and Kim Schultz. Welcome to our February Wednesday Reflection program. Today is also the start of Black History Month. And in the spirit of our president, I say to you today, my friends, the Spirit will not descend without a song. And so if you would allow me, I'd like to sing one verse of a song of Black liberation. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom, oh, freedom over me. And before I'll be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. We're now going to have words of gathering with Reverend Mary Nelson, CTS board member, and a conference minister for the United Church of Christ.
Thank you so much, Brian. Good afternoon, everyone. Dr. Braxton, Dr. Patel, welcome. I'm so pleased to have been invited to open our time together today with a devotional, and before this conversation in particular. My brief for giving a devotional today was to share a text from my specific tradition and share the particularity of my faith as illustrated by the text. And I am a lifelong member of the United Church of Christ, both a child of and an ordained minister in this tradition, which also founded Chicago Theological Seminary. And the United Church of Christ is both a relatively new denomination formed out of the ecumenical movement of the mid-1900s in America, and also a denomination who claims roots in multiple strains of the Protestant Reformations in Europe, as well as in the continued development of an American Protestant religious ethic. And I bring to you this morning a paragraph from the preamble of the United Church of Christ's Constitution and Bylaws, our governing documents. Because ecumenism, and by extension interfaith work, are literally in the DNA of the United Church of Christ. And just as the words of God are written on our hearts in faith, so the words of our ecumenical DNA are written into our governing documents in faith as well. But, and I think this is critical for understanding the unique character of the UCC with regard to what this ecumenical DNA means for us today, the many located historical roots of our denomination do not limit us to perpetuating a particular past, but rather they nourish us to grow forward into an increasingly ecumenical and interfaith future. So I give you an excerpt of the preamble to the Constitution of the United Church of Christ. The United Church of Christ acknowledges as its sole head Jesus Christ, Son of God and Savior. It acknowledges as kindred in Christ all who share in this confession. It looks to the word of God in the scriptures and to the presence and power of the Holy Spirit to prosper its creative and redemptive work in the world. It claims as its own the faith of the historic church expressed in ancient creeds and reclaimed in the basic insights of the Protestant reformers. It affirms the responsibility of the church in each generation to make this faith its own, in reality of worship, in honesty of thought and expression, and in purity of heart before God, in accordance with the teaching of our Lord and the practice prevailing among evangelical Christians. It recognizes two sacraments, baptism and the Lord's Supper or Holy Communion. And in just that paragraph, we have an expression of futuring, an expression of imagination that is rooted in this background, this history, but propels us forward, not to, as I said, perpetuate a past, but to create and imagine and claim a future, each generation making the faith its own. And that is an expansive notion in our tradition and expansive in our future. And I am full of hope for the church because of our past and because of where we can go together.
Amen. And now as we move forward in our program, we're going to have a conversation based on faith. From my tradition, we say faith is the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen. And so we gather today as we share and recognize that there are many faiths. There are many ways that people see the world. And so we're going to be blessed by two distinguished persons. One of our facilitators is our beloved President, Reverend Dr. Braxton, who is a Baptist ordained minister and no stranger to us, as he is our president, better known as our chief listening officer. He holds a PhD in New Testament studies from Emory University. Throughout his academic career, he was a George W. Woodruff Fellow, a Rhodes Scholar, a Jefferson Scholar, and a member of Phi Beta Kappa. Dr. Braxton is pastor of the Open Church of Baltimore, a father, a husband, and scholar with a number of publications coming to us very soon. But most importantly, he is one guided by a commitment to bearing and living out the fruits of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Our guest speaker is Dr. Eboo Patel, founder and president of Interfaith America, an organization that has funded several projects here at CTS, including our COVID-19 vaccine education initiative and our anti-Asian, Muslim, and Black violence program. So thank you, Dr. Patel. Interfaith America's mission is to inspire, equip, and connect leaders and institutions to unlock the potential of America's religious diversity. Dr. Patel is an author, speaker, educator, and interfaith leader who is named one of America's best leaders by U.S. News and World Report. He served on President Obama's inaugural Faith Council. He is an Ashoka Fellow and a Rhodes Scholar, holding a doctorate in the sociology of religion from Oxford University. He lives in Chicago with his wife, Shaynaz, and their two sons. Today, Dr. Braxton and Dr. Patel will have a conversation about the latest of his 5 books entitled We Need to Build. And so I invite you all to receive them now.
Reverend Smith, thank you for those gracious words of introduction. Greetings to the Chicago Theological Seminary family. How wonderful it is to gather in this moment and to have this opportunity for our hearts and our minds to be inspired and enriched. I am completely convinced, based on our brother who is with us today, that the universe, God, the spirits, and the ancestors are very pleased with us because his schedule was such that he could drop by and spend a few moments with us today. I am thrilled to be in conversation with Dr. Eboo Patel. Eboo is a brother beloved. And as I was thinking about this conversation today, Eboo, it came to mind that we first met in the fall, I think, of 2008. So our friendship is just about 15 years old now. And I want the house to know today that across the years that we have been in kinship, I have marveled at how you have spoken with such eloquence and such vulnerability on so many different stages. And yet I also want the house to know that I, in particular, cherish those behind the scene moments. And you know those moments that you and I have shared in quiet phone calls and off the side of the stage when the spotlight has not been on us. And I thank God for how those conversations, when we've talked about being spouses and partners and dads and friends and leaders of institutions, how those conversations have irrigated my soul and kept the fires burning on the altar. Brother, you are welcome in this place. And let's do what we often do. So in other words, we're just going to do what we do when we meet in Greektown over pizza or whatever. Let's just chop it up today. And I have a couple or a few conversation starters that I want to share with you, some more contextual, perhaps a couple specifically around the book. But I want to just begin by inviting you to talk with us about the impetus for your latest book. What prompted you, brother, to write We Need to Build?
Well, first of all, let me just say, I'm going to call you Brad because of our friendship.
Yes.
But in other settings, I might well refer you to as Reverend Dr. Braxton, which is, of course, what you are. But to me, you are just my friend, Brad, a light that both guides and a fire that warms. And I'm grateful for our friendship, and I'm grateful for your presence and your leadership. I'm going to apologize that as I mentioned to you and your team earlier, Brad, my Wi-Fi went down and my cell service just is not strong enough to carry video well. And so as my high school friends like to tell me a long time ago, I have a face made for radio. And so you all will enjoy my radio face for this event, and we'll do this like a live podcast. And so I apologize for not being able to be on video, but I'm glad that cell service is at least working and we can do it audio wise. So I'm gonna jump right into kind of a sensitivity, but that's how we got it, Brad, you and me. And actually, my roots with CTS go back a really long way, and so it is Reverend Dr. Susan Thistlethwaite, who was the president in the early 2000s, was one of the first faith leaders in Chicago, senior faith leaders, to take Interfaith Youth Corps at that time seriously. That's what the organization was called at that time. And she invited me on the visiting committee at CTS. She invited me to teach a class. She invited me to do presentations in it. It gave me courage and strength and confidence, and it elevated the profile of the organization. And Brad, I know you know this when I say this, but you always remember the people who believe in you when you were young, right? You remember the institutions that give you a shot.
Yes.
And CTS was that for me. So I have a 20-year-old relationship with CTS. And Brad, if you were to say to me, hey, I know a swamp on Mars, let's go fishing there, I would say, what time, right? I'll follow you anywhere, right? And I will do virtually anything for CTS because of the role it has played in the history of my own formation and the institution Interfaith America. We have great partners there like Rachel Mikva and others. So I wanted that's a good way to preface, I think some of what I'm going to say. So, Brad, your question was, what was the impetus for writing this book? And I think the impetus, to cut straight to the heart of it, was the question in the past 5 to 8 years, really since about 2015, 2016, are we doing social change wrong? Are we doing social change wrong? And around 2015, 2016, there's the emergence of first of all, there's the really ugly emergence of Donald Trump and the uglier side of America, the racism, the xenophobia, et cetera. It comes out, right? And it's hurtful. And first of all, it's not a surprise. It's not like we haven't seen this before. And there's people that are part of this event, Brad, you included, who've seen it over and over again and again, in ways that immigrants like myself, whose parents came with education right at the time the knowledge economy was taking off. We certainly experienced racism, but not in the same brutal ways that African Americans and other communities in this country have. So that's the first thing I want to say. It wasn't a surprise, but it was kind of a punch in the gut. And I think the question is, what does one do in response to that kind of ugliness that emerges? And I was just very uncomfortable with the frame of the resistance. I was just very uncomfortable with that. And one of the lines in my book, We Need to Build, is social change is not about a more ferocious revolution. It's about a more beautiful social order. And I think the question for me is always, what does the day after tomorrow look like? So if you tear the system down, and there was a lot of talk of tearing the system down, and there still is, although it's not as loud as it was a couple of years back. What then? Will you have the skills to build it back up? Will you have the skills to build it back up? And this part actually is not in my book, We Need to Build. It's something that occurred to me after We Need to Build was published, but I think it's very appropriate for this setting, which is, I think one of the reasons that I was uncomfortable with the frame of the resistance and a kind of burn it down approach to social change is because I'm a Muslim. And at the heart of the Prophet Muhammad and the Prophet Muhammad's mission and ministry is building institutions. And so I'll give you just one example of that. But when the Prophet Muhammad moves from Mecca to Medina, it's such an important event in the Muslim calendar. 620, it occurs in 622. The Muslim calendar is actually dated to that event. It's not dated to the time the Prophet receives revelation in 610. It's not dated to the year the Prophet is born in 570. It's dated to 622. That's how important the move from Mecca to Medina is. And what does the Prophet Muhammad do in Medina? He doesn't principally critique the people with whom he disagrees. He doesn't principally raise Jeremiads against unjust rule, although it's everywhere. The thing he principally does is he builds institutions. He builds a mosque, which doubles as a community center, which means that it's not only Muslims who are welcome in the mosque. There are Christians who pray in the Prophet's mosque. He builds a market, a place where people can sell their goods and services and others can buy them. And he builds a constitution, what's called the Constitution of Medina. And it is a loyalty pact between the diverse sects of Medina, the diverse communities and sects. It guarantees them the ability to practice their customs and faith freely and to come together during times of outside aggression in a pact of mutual defense. The Prophet is not just a revealer, he is also a statesman, and he is a governor, and he is a general, and he is a husband, and he is a father. In some of these ways, actually in all of these ways, he's different than Jesus, who was also revered in Islam. In some ways, the Prophet Muhammad is Jesus, Peter, and Paul in one. He brings a new revelation, but he also has to build a society. And I think that deep in my bones, that example lives within me. And so an approach to social change that is, a Daenerys Targaryen approach, that's a Game of Thrones reference. I'm happy to say more about that later if you'd like, but an approach that is basically like, I'm going to ride my dragons of righteousness and anger and burn down the structures of oppression. But when Daenerys Targaryen actually defeats all of her enemies and is about to sit upon the Iron Throne and be ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, she doesn't rein in an era of peace and prosperity. She looks to her advisors and says, let's go find more people to burn. And that is my fear about an approach to social change that is about only defeating the structures of oppression. What happens when you're in charge? What happens when you're in charge? And the only thing you've learned how to do is burn things down. I think that's a problem.
Beautiful. As you lift up the multiple modalities of the Prophet Muhammad and the importance of building institutions, what comes to my mind is a beautiful moment that some of us had the privilege to share with you and your family and your team last fall. And that was the 20th anniversary of Interfaith America. Talk to us about that moment. What did it mean for you and your team to have that moment, to look back over 20 years, and perhaps even more importantly, when we gather with you for the 40-year anniversary, what will we be celebrating with you?
Right. Those great questions, Brad. Great question. So I'll say two things about. I'll say a handful of things about this. And in a lot of ways, the book We Need to Build, it's a theory of it's articulating a different approach to social change, a building institutions approach, not a burning down structures approach. It is very much a book about faith, about how I think faith guides us in the building of institutions. And it's a book about my personal history in building Interfaith America. And I'll tell you the kind of the Kairos moments, to use beautiful Christian language, in the emergence of the organization, which was founded under the name Interfaith Youth Corps. So I'm in my early 20s. This is the mid 1990s. I'm roaming around Chicago, angry about all kinds of injustice, as is totally justified, virtually in any era in human history. Angry about all sorts of injustice, and just getting involved in interfaith work at the time. And I was starting to go to a variety of interfaith conferences here in Chicago, sponsored by the Parliament of the World's Religions, a conference out in San Francisco at Stanford, by the United Religions Initiative. And at that particular conference, this is June of 1998, I just noticed like everybody on stage was a senior theologian, and they would kind of pontificate in slow and deliberate manners about the importance of theology and doctrine and ritual. And I was like 23 years old, and I was just bored. It just bored me. Like I was there because of the heat-seeking faith of Dietrich Bonhoeffer and Dorothy Day and Mahatma Gandhi and Thich Nhat Hanh, and people who I just thought their fervor, even if it was a calm fervor like Thich Nhat Hanh's fervor, that changed the world. And I was not feeling that energy at this conference. And so I stood up and I raised my fist and I called people out. And this was like in front of 500 people, and it was like at a plenary session. And it would have fit very well into kind of a social change mode that has become pronounced in our current day and age. Fist raised, calling people out. You're boring, you're too old, you're too whatever, where are the young people? Where's the energy? Where's the social change? All this kind of stuff. And people kind of turned to stare at me with some smattering of applause. And then the session is over and people kind of fade away. And this woman comes up to me, and you'll remember, Brad, she was there that night in the fall a few months ago. But this woman, Yolande Trevino, approaches me. And she says, that thing you said about interfaith should really be about young people and social action and a wide range of religious diversity. And it shouldn't principally be about senior theologians and talks on panels. That vision you have, that's powerful. You should build that. So that's the beginnings of Interfaith Youth Corps. Because honestly, that's what it means to take somebody seriously. It's not to affirm their critique. Boy, you are really good at telling other people what they're doing wrong. That is endless, right? Like there will never be a shortage of telling other people what they're doing wrong. Nobody ever gets it fully right. So if that is what we're inviting, you could write 1,000 pages on that every day, what other people are doing wrong. What this woman, this elder was doing was saying, I think you have something, you've just articulated something that's worth building, and it could maybe put some things right. And the first thing I felt, Brad, honestly, was like a shock of fear, because it is a lot easier to tell other people what they're doing wrong than it is to build something halfway right yourself. It just is. It just is, and I think that I was always afraid that somebody would call me on it, and Yolande did. She called me on it, right? Now she did it as an invitation. She didn't do it as a challenge, right? But here I was going around constantly in a self-righteous, holier than thou mode, constantly telling other people what they were doing wrong. And she was like, actually, in all your critique, I'm seeing a vision, and I might be seeing some energy and potential in you. And I think you could do better than telling other people what they're doing wrong. So that's the beginnings of this organization, and this, Brad, but I grew up fortunate in America, professional middle class, but my daddy's not a billionaire or a bishop, right? Like I hustled for the bricks that built this place, and we are now, by orders of magnitude, the largest interfaith organization in the United States. We're a $15 million, 55-person shop.
Wow.
And we probably give more money out in grants, including to places like CTS, than the next largest interfaith organization in America.
Amazing.
And I'm really proud of that, right? That is building something. That's building something. And if I had to name one hero in the American tradition, if I only got to choose a single one, it would be Jane Addams. And Jane Addams, over the course of a half century, builds an institution called Hull House in Chicago, right? Like 6 miles from where you're sitting right now. If you're in the offices at CTS, 6-7 miles from there. And after 20 years at Hull House, Jane Addams writes a book, 20 years at Hull House. And after 20 more years, she writes another book, another 20 years at Hull House, right? And so I have no desire to crown myself, forever emperor of Interfaith America, but I'm committed to building this institution. And I think I write this in my book, We Need to Build. The definition of a good society is a society with a thick network of good institutions. And I think that there are many great themes in American life: women's empowerment, racial equity, environmental preservation, civil rights, civil liberties. Every single one of those has one or more vital civic institutions dedicated to their advancement. I think ensuring religious diversity becomes interfaith cooperation rather than religious conflict is one of the great themes in American life, and it deserves a vital civic institution. And Interfaith America seeks to be that.
You have enriched us in so many ways with all of your writings across the years. And our friend Stephanie Pausell at Harvard Divinity School suggests that writing that matters comes from a place of generosity. And I just want to note how I have always felt that spirit of generosity in your writing as you nudge us to think more deeply and to be better. And I'd like to go to a couple of places in the book to open up some of that conversation with you. There are a couple of places in the book that I want to bring into conversation, especially with the last couple of weeks in the United States, as we think about horrific mass murders, all the killings, all the struggle that we have with violence, and we think about Tyree Nichols in Memphis. And I'm drawn to that place early in the book when you talk about John Lewis and his skill of knowing that sometimes you have to demonstrate and sometimes you have to negotiate. And I want to bring that into conversation with that marvelous image later in the book when you talk about the hood ornament on the car, and sometimes we're giving folks just a hood ornament and folks have a destination to reach. We need to give them actual transport, the whole symbol and substance. So I want to bring those into conversation with this reality. As you talk about not confusing symbol and substance and working through each of those, I want you to talk with us now about what it means to do social change work when the symbol actually may be the substance. And the symbol here is whiteness. The symbol here is maleness. There's something about the symbolics of America that actually is quite substantive, that continues to work itself out in death-dealing ways. What does it mean to negotiate with a system that is shot through with a death-dealing symbolism?
Brett, I don't know if I fully understand your question. And it is not clearly white supremacy in many manifestations is a murderous force. And I think about the work of Brian Stevens, who I think is a Jane Addams figure of our times, and the work that he does with the Equal Justice Initiative in the courts, but also with symbols, as you suggest, right? And I think that maybe this is I'm working my way. When I say I don't understand your question, it's my fault, not yours. Just
not at all. Let's do it, man.
Just to be clear. So I'm working my way towards an understanding. I'm working my, so what Brian Stevens, what he is leading as far as inviting people to dig up the dirt at the spot of lynchings and to have that dirt, that is like the symbolism of resurrection is what Brian Stevens is doing, right? And there are jars of this dirt at the museum that he has founded in Alabama. And it's resurrection, and it is also redemption. Part of what strikes me whenever Brian Stevenson talks is there is an opportunity for the oppressor to redeem him or herself, and it is following a Christian process about which he is explicit, right? You confess, you seek forgiveness, you have an opportunity for redemption. So in the digging up of the dirt at the spot of those lynchings, it is an opportunity, it is a ritual and a symbolism for people who suffered, who are descendants of those who are lynched, to move, as Gary Snyder might say, a millionth of an inch closer to shalom, to wholeness, and an opportunity for the descendants of the oppressors, who, as you are suggesting in your question, Brad, still experience some advantage in their whiteness. It's an opportunity for them to have a moment to confess, if you will, to the extent that we can do that on behalf of our ancestors, to seek a forgiveness and to redeem. And I those stories that Brian Stevenson tells, I find so powerful, right? So my sense is that is what you are talking about. Am I right about that?
You are very much onto something, and so let's just go to this experience, because I'm really listening with my third ear to a lot of the discourse around, for example, Tyre Nichols. And in particular, what I'm thinking about in Memphis right now is the way in which some people seem to be confounded, because this particular moment, as we think about what it means to build, transgresses the racial and ethnic dynamic of previous moments, right? So everybody is confounded. Okay, so what does this mean when they are Black police officers that do this, right? And I'm really struck by the lack of sophistication around this. And what I'm specifically driving at is Tyre Nichols' body is a symbol of an invitation for degradation. So whether you are Black, white, Asian, trans, queer, whatever your identity may be, if you are an agent of the state and you run across this symbol, the symbol and the substance literally come together. The symbol gives you the moral warrant to actually murder someone. So symbol and substance coalesce in a profound way for certain kinds of bodies in certain kinds of spaces. And I'm wrestling with that dynamic of symbol and substance really transgressing those boundaries in very profound ways. And then if you feel that way, what does it mean to negotiate? How do you negotiate when at any moment in a regular traffic stop, the symbolics of your personhood is an invitation for you to be killed?
Brad, I find that very moving and profound. And on the matter of Tyre Nichols, like, my heart is only in lament right now. I can't do analysis. And and I know your heart is in lament too.
Yes.
I know your heart is in, so that is so on the specific subject of that sacred man and his brutal martyrdom, I will just keep my heart in lament. Yes. I will raise, I think, a complicated question on the same theme.
Yes.
So there was just a suicide bombing in Pakistan at a mosque in Peshawar, in which the victims were all Muslim and the perpetrators were all Muslim. And that happens all the time.
Okay.
And it's not just Muslims and Muslims. And so and my heart is in lament around that also, right? What I am asking, and I don't have an answer to this. I don't have an answer to this, right? But I do have, I think, a piece of wisdom from my PhD advisor at Oxford, and we both experienced the wisdom under gray skies from advisors at Oxford. And what my PhD advisor once said to me, as I was like trying to figure out how to like work my preferred theory of the world and this kind of very scattered, messy data that I was gathering for my ethnography on South Asians in London. He said to me, the cardinal sin of the intellectual is to squeeze the world into his worldview. And so I think if our worldview is only that that violence occurs between historic oppressors and historically oppressed, that is actually not, the world is way more complex than that.
Indeed. Yes.
And so I think it is a very challenging question. Do we have a theory about the brutal realities of the world? Right. And the brutal realities of the world, it's not just a world where a stone-faced white supremacist Derek Chauvin stares into a camera while kneeling the life out of a black man's neck.
Yes.
Right. That is a very important fact in the world. And there are patterns of facts that are in that vein. And then there are also other facts in the world. And what I think an interesting question is, what do we do with those other facts?
Yes. Chopping it up with you is one of the great delights in my life, brother. I want to pose one more question.
I'm giving us both a headache. I think. So
this is what we do. We're just letting our friends eavesdrop on what we do. Right?
That's actually, that is exactly right.
So I want to just pose this one final question and then open up to the house for the house to further engage you in dialogue. From brutality to beauty, one of the hallmarks of your leadership is this remarkable capacity God and the universe have given you to assemble powerful emerging leaders, many of whom I have witnessed and benefited from across the years. What are the young leaders around you teaching you? What beauty are they exposing you to? How are they stretching you and causing you to grow? And I'll just say this, in some of these programs now that you and I participate in, at least on my side, Eboo, I'm being called a village elder these days, right? So we're not these young cats we were back in the day, although as I tell people, 53 has never looked as good as it looks on me, so I just want to note that, so, but you have these young folks, man, these war horses around you, non-violent war horses who are really doing serious struggle. What are they teaching you? What's beautiful about what they're doing with you and for you?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I'm just looking at the list of folks who are on this webinar / podcast here. At least my part of it's a podcast, and one of our terrific staff is on here, Alexis Vaughn, Reverend Alexis Vaughn, who leads our racial equity work in the Black Interfaith Project that you've been involved in. You've got that great book coming out with Anthony Pinn, just this beautiful dialogue between a Black Baptist preacher, you, and Anthony Pinn, a secular humanist, and we're going to be doing a lot of stuff with you around that book. So that Alexis is leading that work for us, and I'm just love being around her energy. So I'll answer your question very specifically, right? So just had a couple of younger rabbis on my podcast, Rabbi Josh Stanton and Rabbi Ben Spratt, and they're maybe 10, 15 years younger than me, and they just put out a book called Awakenings. which is specifically about the Jewish community, but I think it has relevance to all American religion. And the story of the Book of Awakenings is that they're at a conference one day, a conference of Jewish leaders, and there's all this talk about, laments for the decline in synagogue membership and the decline in people strongly identifying with Judaism. There's all this data showing that fewer people are involved in stuff, et cetera, et cetera. It's actually quite familiar to most religious communities. It's a story of decline, right? Where are the people in church? Where are the people at our summer camps, et cetera, et cetera? And Josh and Ben look at each other and they're like, I don't know what people are talking about. We're constantly surrounded by energy. More people from different backgrounds want to be Jews than ever before. And there's such interesting ways that, we hear Jewish wisdom in all kinds of different contexts, from pop culture to healthcare. And we just see energy, and we need to draw a circle around the dots of energy that we're seeing and show that picture to the world. And I just get so much energy from people telling the story of possibility and then like literally willing the world towards it, and I think that's, that for me is like a model of social change, right? It's kind of a Jack and the Beanstalks model. Like we all walk around with magic beans in our pocket. Mine is called a thusbee. It's my Ismaili Muslim thusbee, right? I walk around with it in my pocket, my magic beans, right? And I think what religion inspires us to do, you articulate an ideal. You articulate the intersection of deen and dunya. That's from Islam, of faith and life, okay? Or the kingdom of God from Christianity, okay? You articulate an ideal, and then you try to build institutions to that ideal. Yes. CTS is an institution built to the UCC idea of the kingdom of God, right? It is attempting to be both a demonstration of it, and it's attempting to be a signpost along the way, right? And of course, we're not going to get it perfect. Like, welcome to reality. That's actually one of the things I think that village elders like you and me can kind of bring to the table. Like, of course, we're not going to get it perfect, right? If you're going to be mad at me for not getting it perfect, like rev up your anger charger every day, Yes. But this notion of we articulate an ideal and we build institutions that seek to move ourselves ever closer. That's what we do. That's what we do. And Josh and Ben's book Awakenings has helped remind me of that.
Marvelous. Speaking of ideals, it would be terrible of me to be selfish. I've had you long enough. I know there are family members in the house who would like to pose questions. Reverend Smith, I will invite you to join me too in terms of monitoring the chat and seeing if people are using the emoji. Feel free now to pose a question to our brother or an observation for further dialogue. This is absolutely Marv-tastic.
Please feel free to unmute yourselves, raise your virtual hands, and give us an opportunity to acknowledge you if you have any questions or comments.
If nobody in a CTS event challenges me at my discomfort with the resistance, I will be very disappointed.
Okay, then. I'm just I'm curious about definitions, because the way you responded to Dr. Braxton's query about symbol, when you brought up the lynching museum in Birmingham and so forth, it almost seems to me that the definition of racism is still confined to personal moral failings. And how do you build out of, or with people who are convinced by their personal moral failings to be better without a grasp of the symbol of the point of the symbol. The point of the symbol is to render everybody epistemologically crippled. And that's why those officers did not, I mean, I think that's why they catered to the symbol rather than to the humanity of the person. And how do we imbricate much more of an idea of symbolic sacramentalism of folk rather than depend on people to change their personal moral failing orientation to a better way to think about racism?
Yeah, I think that that's a powerful question. Thank you for that. Look, I don't know, right? I don't, and as I said, when it comes to the brutal martyrdom of Tyre Nichols, my heart is mostly in lament right now. When I'm able to move to having some analysis around it, I just don't know if the beginning and the end of the story is only about the race of Tyre Nichols. I just don't know if that's the beginning and the end of the story, right? And if one is a sociologist, as I am, one asks questions like, well, are there people who are from a variety of races who are beat in merciless and brutal ways? Does that happen in the world? Right. And if that happens in the world, as I was saying earlier to Reverend Braxton, I think an interesting challenge is, how does one have a theory that covers those facts? Right. And so because I'm a sociologist and not a theologian, and I respect both ways of thinking, but I'm a sociologist, which means I start with the facts of the world. And the question I ask is, do we have a theory that covers the facts of the world? Right. And in my academic training, and again, I want to say it again, my heart is mostly in lament about the particular incident about which we are speaking. So I don't want to be in full analysis mode around that, right? Only to say on the broader question, when it comes to, let's say, issues of violence and the terrible suicide bombing that I spoke of that took place 36 hours ago in Pakistan. How do we think about that? How do we think about that? And I'm just not sure, but I personally, and this is the academic in me, I don't want to quickly jump to conclusions. I don't want to quickly jump personally, right? And I think there are other academic modes of being. There's theory, right? Which has a principle, and it seeks to find examples of that principle in the world. That is not my academic mode. I look to the facts of the world and ask the question, what theories best explain this wide range of facts? And when I think I have a theory that explains facts, I actually follow the philosophy of Karl Popper, who says, now your job is to find facts that don't fit your theories. So as an academic, that's how I move through the world. Right. And I put it on the table for consideration. I put it on the table for consideration. On the question of symbols and substance. So the example that I use in my book is a very, very different example. So if I can kind of just, clear the deck and do like ginger between the sushi rolls or ginger between the dishes here, kind of a palate cleanser from the extremely challenging topic that we were just talking about, and move to the topic I spoke about in We Need to Build. The example that I was giving, and I submit this for people's consideration as I do everything, is the example of the Board of Education in San Francisco during the latter months of the COVID pandemic, when they were spending their meetings trying to change the names of the schools in San Francisco because they said that the names of the schools were white supremacist, and even though they got some of the facts wrong, right? Like some of the names that they wanted to change, those people didn't do the things that they said that they did. And the mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, who's interestingly enough, an African-American female mayor, was like, why aren't you people trying to get kids back in schools? Like, why are you spending your time trying to change the names of the schools? Kids in 2/3 of the country are back and learning in school. And now that we have our teachers vaccinated, and now that we know that kids don't get COVID in as dangerous a ways as adults, and most of the kids in the country are back in-person school learning, why aren't you trying to get kids back in schools? And that was my point in the chapter that I wrote in my book, We Need to Build, right? I say, let's try to align the symbolic and the substantive as much as possible. But to the illustration that Brad used, I was saying, you can't give people a hood ornament when they need a car, right? You can't tell people, hey, sorry that you're not learning math in the classroom with a real life teacher, but we changed the name of the school.
I see.
And I actually think this, that it's an issue in social change, right? It's an issue in social change. And, I would say, it is not always the case, right? But I would issue a challenge to those of us involved in social change. Building a school and having teachers there every day, 8 hours a day, and before school and after school, that is a kind of super hard work that I know many people on this webinar have done, right? But that's like chopping wood and carrying water every day, and that's like the unsexy stuff of elevating people's position in our society. And changing the names on schools, that's like the tweetable stuff. And what are we going to be about as social change agents?
I see Marva Coleman's hand, and then there's a question in the chat from Lisa Notter, and those will conclude our questions from the House.
So
will you please unmute?
So I can read the question from Lisa Notter to Eboo. As an interfaith organization, Hands of Peace is seeing a trend of people pulling back their funding for interfaith engagement, and instead of devoting it to specific societal problems. How have you built Interfaith America so successfully, making the case for interfaith engagement worthy of funding in and of itself?
Lisa, I will, first of all, hello, nice to be with you on this. I will take that as a compliment. Thank you for that. I actually write about this a lot in the book, We Need to Build. I kind of tell the whole story of building Interfaith America, particularly the funding of it. And so that might be useful to you. But I think at one point we discussed CTS maybe having some books to hand out to folks on the webinar. But in any case, it's not hard to get a hold of. If you're interested in getting a hold of it. And I do write a lot about what it looked like to fundraise for Interfaith America. Look, I think like lots of things, there's an awful lot of luck involved. Like if you were to have asked me 10 years ago, and you may well have asked me 10 years ago, what's the secret in funding Interfaith America? I'd be like, well, I'm a really good fundraiser, blah, 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 right? Now I'm like, let me tell you that 10 times I've been like ridiculously lucky, right? There's an awful lot of luck involved. And to some extent, I think it's just, to use a baseball analogy, it's just at bats. And we at Interfaith America are just constantly at bat. We're constantly in the mix, right? Constantly at conferences, constantly running projects, constantly sending out proposals, constantly pitching funders, constantly hearing their feedback, coming back to them 6 months later. We're just constantly in the mix. And I think, one of the things that we make sure that we do, and this isn't just us, lots of people do this, but there's a really high standard at Interfaith America about this. We just always execute. Like everything, there's a term in Islam, in Islamic Arabic, ihsan, IHSAN, ihsan means excellence. And that's the standard at the organization. That's the standard. So if you hear somebody give a talk, if you come to a conference, if you come to one of the Black Interfaith projects that Alexis runs, if you have somebody on a podcast, just expect them to be excellent. And I think that combination of just like constantly being at bat, getting lucky, making some of our own luck, hustling, and executing, I think that some combination of that is allows us to be where we're at. And look, I'm insatiable. I'm insatiable. I go to bed thinking about this. I wake up thinking about this. I've been doing it for 20 years. I'm insatiable. There's a great story about Tom Brady, who just retired today. 60 Minutes said to him, you've won 6 or 7 Super Bowl rings. I forget which one it is. Which one of those is your favorite? And Tom Brady said, the next one. And that's how I am. Like, I'm just, I'm constantly thinking about, okay, what's the next project? Right. And Brad knows that about me, which is why he was like, what does the 40-year anniversary look like? I'm thinking about that.
Yes.
I'm thinking about that.
We have a question or observation from Marva Coleman, and then we'll move to conclude our time together.
Okay. Good morning. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a joy to be here. Now, I don't wear the age of our beloved president. I'm not so lucky to be 53. I'm wearing 81 years. So forgive me if my mind gets a little shaky. The Honorable Patel, you mentioned teaching and how, well, I won't say grueling, I forgot the word you used, but how it's from morning to evening, Well, then you got the evening to also check papers and plan and all that. So I did that for 54 years. So I know a little bit about what you were trying to speak
Wow.
about, getting children back into the learning mode. I was so lucky to have Dr. Terrell as my sponsor. And the topic of police brutality was my constructive theology paper. And I should be better prepared to answer those questions brought up by our beloved president. The topic of my paper was, who shall bear the cross of the slain Black bodies? And I should be able to give you more information when you were talking about the symbolism and all. But there was one statement that came to my mind as you asked that question. And the problem with Black on Black crime and the policemen, Black policemen who brutalized Nichols. It stems from the colonization of our minds in the white supremacist country that we're living in. And in that respect, then we take on the identity of our oppressors. So those Black cops were able to beat Nichols because they identified on the side of the oppressor, the white policeman. I'm sorry I can't cite to you some of the other authors who have written about this, but maybe at some point later I could articulate more about this topic. I brought up the question, I tweeted it out. Why were things done so quickly? Why were the 5 Black policemen fired immediately? And I said, it was because all Blacks were involved at that point. The chief was Black. And so she wanted to do what Blacks became the victim in the whole situation. And I said that if one white person had been in that group, then they would have held back on the information until they got the narratives right. And then later on, I heard one reporter that said there was a white involved. I said, oh, really? Then why wasn't his picture up there with the other 5? And I kept tweeting it out. Why aren't you showing the picture of the white cop? I tweeted everybody. On my tweets, I tweet the president and the DOJ and senators and everybody. But finally, they brought the picture, but they never added it with the 5. That white cop tased Nichols and he was the one that stayed in the car when they grabbed him out. But he tased Nichols, and his picture should have been up there. And he should have been fired and received the same punishment that the other 5 did.
And Sister Coleman, may I do this for us, please?
Sure.
I want to take what you're driving after and offer this as an invitation to Eboo as we conclude this. You said something, and I think with the brilliance of his mind, I would want to hear the nugget of what you're saying. Eboo, as you are writing this book, and as you are now teaching and lecturing and advancing this book, how are you engaging the decolonization process? All the ways, right, that colonization works, whether it's through religious identity, gender identity, racial identity, how are you building this alternative reality that is so important in a way that avoids the colonial project and all of the legacies of colonialism?
So if I can just say to the sister who spoke earlier, just thank you for your your lament and analysis. And I find what you're saying totally compelling. And thank you for informing me that there was a white person involved, because that picture has not been broadly presented. And the only thing, you were saying that you wish you could quote others on this, but the fact that you've been a teacher for 54 years is credibility for lifetime. So thank you for who you are and for what you've been and what you've contributed, and including what you contributed here. Brett, the question you ask is super interesting, right? So if I can ask you, which colonial project are you speaking of?
The colonization of the mind that whiteness is right and whiteness is who Blacks ought to emulate and act like whiteness. White standards, white beauty, right. The colonization of the mind in that respect, that we identify actually with our oppressors.
So just to confirm, Brad, that's what you were talking about also. I just want to make sure that I'm addressing the question.
I would also add in particular, and this is for we're going to be doing this for many, many years, brother, right? I would also add the colonial project that also is about Christian imperialism and Christocentrism. And I say that particularly as a member, right, of the Christian tradition, of the ways in which Christianity of all sorts is so implicated in these violent narratives and practices.
Right. So I think that this is where my identity and position places me in a distinctive position in the metaphorical room. So I was born in India. I am a Muslim, I'm an Ismaili Muslim. I am a minority, not only a minority, but a minority that is viewed as somewhere between heterodox and heretical within the broader scope of Islam. And so when I think of colonialism, I'm thinking of the United States is not my only reference point, right? I mean, what is happening to Muslims right now in India is part of Hindu colonialism. But who ruled India for centuries? Muslims. And how did they come to rule India? It wasn't just Sufi poetry and songbirds. It was colonialism. Muslims conquered India, and they ruled it for centuries. how do we think of the Japanese colonialism of Korea? And so the fact that I was born outside of the United States and I've spent considerable time outside of the United States, when somebody says colonialism, my mind does not only go to Western Christian colonialism.
Fascinating. Yes.
And if you go to wide swaths of Africa and South Asia and Indonesia and Turkey, there is a form of Salafi Islamic colonialism, a very an interpretation of Islam that emerges in Saudi Arabia in the course of the past 30 or 40 or 50 years, which has been exported with both money and coercion to many parts of the Muslim majority world. And so this is not to say that Western colonialism, of course, Western colonialism exists and is ugly, right? And that white supremacy is a consequence of that. The persistence of white supremacy is a consequence of that. And I cannot help but think of the whole world. It's 8 billion people, the many, many centuries of history. So I think of, I don't have a theory that explains all of those facts. And because I have been trained as a sociologist, I will not deform the facts of the world to fit within the limited theories that I have.
Well,
I will say this, and this is a challenging thing to say. My wife, beautiful Indian American woman, has never, ever been told by a white person she shouldn't go out in the sun because it makes her skin dark. She was regularly told that by other Indians growing up. Regularly. Very common thing. So it's an interesting question. Is that Indians absorbing white supremacy, or is that an indigenous Indian form of racism? And I think that you know, people of all backgrounds are complicated enough to have their own indigenous racisms and not only to copy white racism.
Eboo, on behalf of your Chicago Theological Seminary family, we just want to say thank you. Thank you for writing. Thank you for leading. Thank you for opening our hearts and our minds through your vulnerability, your humility, and your extraordinary heart and mind, and your eloquence. Drawing a circle around these dots of energy, brother. That's what you have done so powerfully today. And you see the love in the chat from Brother Brendan. This was phenomenal, thought-provoking. Indeed, thank you so much. And hey, let's do it again real soon. Let's let our friends eavesdrop on our Greektown pasta conversations. Brother,
I look forward to
you
that.
are loved in this place.
I appreciate you, friend. Thank you so much. Thanks to all of you.